Hello everyone, welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight, we're diving into one of the deepest questions humanity has ever asked. Does consciousness ever truly die? As you settle in, let your thoughts drift gently between wakefulness and wonder. This isn't a conversation meant to answer everything, but to open something inside you, something ancient that's been asking quietly all along. What happens to the awareness that looks through your eyes? Where does it go when the body stops, when time moves on, when even memory fades? For centuries, people have tried to define consciousness. Some say it's just the product of brain activity, a dance of neurons firing in precise patterns. Others believe it's something much larger, something that doesn't depend on the body at all. Perhaps they say consciousness is fundamental to the universe itself, the very fabric from which everything else arises. If that's true, then maybe it doesn't die at all. Maybe it only changes form. When you look at the stars at night, it's easy to forget that you're looking back in time. The light reaching your eyes left those stars thousands, sometimes millions of years ago. You're seeing what once was. That same light travels through the dark vacuum of space long after the star itself has faded away. And in a way, isn't consciousness like that? A flicker of awareness that continues on, even when its source seems to have burned out. Science tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only transforms. The atoms that make up your body were once part of stars, drifting dust, and ancient oceans. The water in your cells may have passed through the veins of trees, the lungs of animals, or the clouds above distant mountains. Every molecule in you is older than your mind can fathom. And yet, here you are, alive, aware, thinking about yourself as something separate from everything else. But what if that separation is an illusion? What if the consciousness that you call you is just one ripple in a vast ocean of awareness, rising and falling, but never truly gone? The neuroscientist might say that consciousness depends on the brain. When neurons stop firing, the light of awareness goes out. It's a clean, logical view, one that fits neatly into a world of measurable data and biological mechanisms. Yet even among scientists, there's growing uncertainty. How does matter, no matter how complex, give rise to experience? How does a brain, made of the same elements found in rocks and rivers, produce the vivid inner world of colors, sounds, emotions, and dreams? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. It's a question that science can describe around, but not through. And so, the mystery remains. You can measure brain activity, you can map its structures and observe how thoughts and sensations appear. But no one can explain why it feels like something to be you. Why this particular collection of atoms gives rise to a mind that can wonder, love, remember, and dream. Many traditions have tried to explain this mystery in their own ways. In ancient Egypt, the soul was thought to have multiple parts. Some stayed with the body, some traveled to the afterlife, and some merged with the stars. In Hindu philosophy, consciousness is seen as eternal. Atman, the self, is not separate from Brahman, the infinite. Death, in that view, is not an ending, but a return, a dissolving of individual awareness back into the vastness from which it came. In Buddhism, the idea is slightly different. There is no permanent self to die at all. What we call I is just a temporary arrangement of perceptions, sensations, and memories. When these dissolve, the stream of consciousness continues, not as the same person, but as the continuation of causes and conditions. Like one flame lighting another, awareness moves forward, changing shape but never ceasing. Modern physics offers its own strange poetry. Quantum mechanics shows us that the universe is not as solid as it seems. Particles exist in states of possibility until observed. Some physicists suggest that consciousness might play a role in shaping that reality, that the act of observation collapses potential into existence. If that's true, then consciousness isn't something that arises within the universe. It's part of the fundamental machinery of the universe. It doesn't live inside you, you live inside it. But let's slow down. What does it mean for consciousness to die? We know the body stops. The brain ceases its electrical symphony. But death is not a single instant, it's a gradual process. Some cells live for minutes, even hours after clinical death. The heart may be still, but tiny sparks of activity can linger. In that strange space between life and death, something mysterious happens. People brought back from the edge often describe vivid experiences, floating above their bodies, seeing light, feeling peace or unity. Skeptics explain these as brain reactions to oxygen loss or chemical flooding, but others see them as glimpses beyond the veil. Regardless of what they are, these experiences hint at something profound. The transition between being and not being may not be as abrupt as we think. Perhaps it's not a door slamming shut, but a passageway fading into another kind of awareness. If consciousness is indeed tied to the body, then maybe it dissolves slowly, like mist rising from a lake at dawn. But if it's something deeper, something that precedes and outlives form, then maybe death is only a transformation of perspective. Imagine consciousness as a river. Each mind, each living being, is a wave rising from its surface. The wave feels itself as separate, a unique crest moving and breaking against the world. But when it falls, it doesn't vanish. It merges back into the flow that gave it life. The river never ends, it only shifts and reshapes. If you look closely enough, perhaps that's what happens to us. Each birth is the river's surface forming a new ripple. Each death is the return to the current below. There's a story told by some physicists that consciousness might not just observe reality, it might be the thread that binds it together. Some even theorize that consciousness and the universe are two sides of the same coin. One cannot exist without the other. So if the universe never truly dies, perhaps consciousness doesn't either. It only moves, expands, and reorganizes itself in ways we can't yet comprehend. But then there's another possibility. What if consciousness is both personal and universal? What if your awareness, the you that listens to this now, is a local tuning of something vast and infinite, like a radio tuned to one particular frequency in an endless field of signals? When the body fades, the signal doesn't stop existing. The receiver just goes quiet. The broadcast continues, everywhere, in all directions. Of course, this remains a mystery. We can't measure consciousness outside of living systems. We can't prove what happens when it no longer interacts with a brain. But the question persists because something deep inside us senses that awareness cannot simply disappear. It feels too primal, too essential, too connected to everything else. The idea that consciousness ends completely feels incomplete, as though the story cuts off mid-sentence. There's also the strange matter of memory and time. Some people who have had near-death experiences describe seeing their entire lives unfold in an instant. A panorama of every choice, every feeling, every moment. Could consciousness, freed from the brain, perceive time differently? Could it experience existence as a whole, not a sequence? It's impossible to say, but it raises a profound question. Is consciousness bound by the same rules as matter, or does it exist on a different level altogether? You can think of consciousness like light passing through a prism. The body, the mind, the senses, they shape and colour it, splitting it into the rainbow of thoughts and experiences that make up a human life. But when the prism breaks, the light doesn't end. It simply returns to its original, formless brilliance. And maybe that's what we fear most. Not death itself, but the loss of individuality. The fading of the the idea that this particular experience of being, your memories, your loves, your story, might dissolve back into something vast and impersonal. Yet even that might not be something to fear. The ocean doesn't mourn the loss of a wave. It simply continues being what it always was. Boundless, alive, whole. So as you rest here tonight, listening and thinking quietly, consider this. Perhaps consciousness doesn't die because it was never born. Maybe what we call consciousness is simply the universe becoming aware of itself, again and again through countless forms. Each life, each moment of awareness, is a temporary lens through which reality sees itself. The body may fade, the thoughts may cease, but the awareness that allows them to exist, that fundamental knowing behind all experience, may be eternal. When we sleep, we experience a small version of this mystery. The body lies still, the mind drifts away, yet consciousness doesn't vanish. It moves through dreams, through darkness, through silence. And when we awaken, we say we came back, but where did we go? Perhaps we never left at all. Perhaps the same continuity that bridges waking and dreaming also bridges life and death, a cycle of awareness folding in and out of form, forever. As the night deepens and your thoughts soften, let that question linger gently. Does consciousness ever truly die, or does it simply change its shape, returning to the same timeless field that once gave birth to stars, oceans, and the first breath of life itself? When we ask if consciousness ever truly dies, we're really asking something more personal. What happens to me when I'm gone? It's one of those questions that slips between the lines of what science can measure. You can weigh a brain, scan it, track every electrical pulse, but you can't locate the feeling of being alive inside it. You can't find the part that looks out at the world and silently says, I am. That small but infinite feeling of I am is at the heart of everything we call consciousness. It doesn't seem to have a clear location. If you try to point to it, it disappears. It's not quite the thoughts that come and go, not the emotions that rise and fade. It's the still presence behind them, the awareness that notices the movement. When people speak about enlightenment or awakening, they often describe recognizing that awareness as their true nature, that the sense of being a separate self was an illusion all along. And yet we experience individuality so vividly. The memories, the personality, the sense of identity, all of it feels undeniably real. So the question becomes, if consciousness survives the death of the body, does the self go with it? Or does something more fundamental remain, stripped of identity but still aware? Many who've had near-death experiences describe an overwhelming sense of unity, of merging with something vast, luminous, and intelligent. They speak of no longer feeling separate, of understanding that everything is connected, and that death was not an ending but a homecoming. Whether you interpret that as the brain's final flicker of chemical illusion, or as a glimpse beyond physical life, it leaves an imprint on those who experience it. Many come back transformed, less afraid of death, more present in life. Consciousness, in this view, seems to exist on a spectrum. There's the everyday awareness tied to sensory input, thought, and memory, but there's also something deeper, what some traditions call pure consciousness, untouched by form or content. When the body dies, perhaps that pure awareness remains, just without its temporary human filter. Like light after passing through a stained glass window, it returns to its original clarity once the glass is gone. If you think of consciousness as light, then the body and brain are like lenses focusing it into a specific experience. Each life is a unique arrangement of colour and pattern. The physical death of the body might just be the lens breaking, not the light disappearing. The light remains even if it no longer forms the same image. This is not something we can prove, but it feels intuitively right to many. There's something about awareness that seems indestructible, even when everything else changes. Consider dreams. While you dream, the body is still, eyes closed, brain waves slow and rhythmic. Yet within that inner theatre, entire worlds appear. You can see, hear, feel, even think you are someone else. In that moment, the dream feels real. When you wake, you realize it was only the mind, but while it lasted, it was reality. Some philosophers have suggested that waking life might not be so different, that consciousness is projecting and experiencing reality the same way it projects and experiences dreams. If that's the case, then death might be like waking up from the dream of being human. When you take this idea seriously, it changes everything about how you view existence. What if consciousness is not something that happens inside the brain, but something the brain tunes into, like a radio tuning into invisible waves? When the radio breaks, the broadcast continues. You just can't receive it anymore. In this analogy, death doesn't end consciousness. It just ends your access to that specific frequency of experience. The signal remains everywhere beyond time. Throughout history, many thinkers have hinted at this. The philosopher Plato wrote of the soul as immortal, existing before and after the body. The mystic Rumi wrote that death is not the end, but the beginning of seeing. Even Einstein, though not religious, remarked that energy cannot be destroyed, and that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubborn illusion. To a mind deeply rooted in the scientific worldview, these might sound like poetic metaphors. But perhaps poetry and physics are closer than we think. They both try to describe what lies just beyond the limits of our understanding. Let's return to something observable, the process of dying itself. When people are near death, their brains undergo a cascade of changes. Electrical activity doesn't instantly stop. It fluctuates, sometimes even intensifies briefly. Studies have shown that moments before death, there can be a surge of synchronized brain waves, almost like the mind is taking one last deep breath of awareness. What's happening in those moments? Is it simply the body shutting down, or is consciousness loosening from its physical anchor, preparing to move beyond? Of course, we can't yet know for sure, but what's remarkable is that consciousness seems far more resilient than we once thought. People who've been declared clinically dead have reported vivid experiences after minutes without a heartbeat. Their brains should not have been able to generate coherent perceptions, yet something persisted. Some described hovering above their bodies, seeing doctors and nurses trying to revive them. Later, they recounted details that were verified by those present. Science doesn't have a full explanation, but the stories keep coming. There's something about awareness that resists boundaries. Even in deep sleep, when the mind is quiet, awareness doesn't vanish. It simply rests. When you awaken, it reappears seamlessly, as though it was always there. Death may not be so different, just longer and more mysterious. Perhaps consciousness never truly disappears. It only changes its relationship to form. If you zoom out far enough, you begin to see how everything in the universe is in a constant state of transformation. Stars collapse and are reborn. Galaxies merge, matter decays, and from its ashes, new forms emerge. The entire cosmos is a cycle of death and renewal, over and over. Nothing in nature is ever lost. It just becomes something else. So why should consciousness be the one exception? There's also a growing perspective among scientists studying the mind that consciousness might not be produced by matter, but instead be a fundamental property of it. In this view, called panpsychism, everything in the universe has some degree of consciousness, even the simplest particles. Not awareness like ours, but some faint glimmer of experience. If that's true, then the universe itself is conscious in some way, and we are its temporary expressions. When we die, we don't lose consciousness. We return to the universal field from which we came. It's a radical idea, but it's gaining traction because it solves one of science's biggest mysteries: how subjective experience arises from objective matter. If consciousness is fundamental, then it doesn't need to emerge. It's already woven into the structure of reality. In that sense, you don't have consciousness, you are consciousness, temporarily wearing a human form. So maybe the right question isn't, does consciousness die? But can consciousness ever be separate from existence itself? And if it cannot, then perhaps death is not a disappearance, but a merging, an unbinding of the limited self from the infinite source. There's an ancient metaphor from the Upanishads, one of India's oldest philosophical texts. It says, "As rivers flow into the ocean and lose their names and forms, so the wise, freed from individuality, merge into the self." The image is simple but profound. A river may twist and turn, carve mountains, nourish forests, but its journey always ends in the sea. The sea doesn't lose the river, it becomes it. The essence remains, though the form dissolves. What would it mean to live with that understanding? Perhaps it would mean seeing death not as an enemy, but as part of the same creative force that gives us life. The same flow that brings us into existence also takes us out of it, and in between, we get to experience the wonder of being conscious at all. Think about how unlikely it is that you exist as you right now. Every ancestor, every atom, every coincidence of time and space had to align for this particular awareness to arise. And yet, here you are, aware that you are aware. It's such a delicate, impossible thing. Maybe consciousness doesn't die because it was never a thing to begin with. Maybe it's the space in which things happen, the silent backdrop against which all experience appears. This shifts the perspective entirely. Instead of seeing yourself as a being inside the universe, you might begin to see yourself as the universe experiencing itself as a person for a little while. Death then becomes not a loss, but a release, like an actor stepping off stage after the play ends, knowing the theatre itself continues. Every night, when darkness falls and the world grows quiet, that deeper part of you, the one that simply is, remains untouched by thought or fear. It's there between your breaths, in the stillness before a dream begins. That same awareness, infinite and patient, may be what continues beyond the limits of the body. And maybe, in ways we can't yet understand, it's what connects every living being that has ever existed. The body may fall silent, the mind may fade, but perhaps consciousness, the timeless witness of all things, does not die. It simply changes the scenery. There's a moment that arrives for everyone who contemplates death deeply enough, a quiet realization that the question isn't only about what happens after, but what consciousness truly is right now. Because if we can understand what awareness is in life, perhaps we'll understand what it might become in death. So let's look more closely at this strange and constant presence that seems to sit behind every thought, every sensation, every moment. When you close your eyes and try to find the source of your consciousness, it's elusive. You can locate where a sound comes from, or where your hand is resting, but not where awareness itself lives. It feels everywhere and nowhere. Something you use to experience the world, but something that also quietly observes you experiencing it. That paradox has puzzled philosophers for centuries. If consciousness isn't confined to a specific point in the body, could it be something more fundamental than the body itself? Modern neuroscience describes consciousness as the result of brain activity, patterns of neurons communicating through electrical and chemical signals. When these patterns are interrupted, such as under anesthesia, awareness fades. When they resume, consciousness returns. On the surface, this seems to suggest a simple cause and effect. No brain, no consciousness. But that explanation leaves something vital unanswered. Even if we can map the mechanics of perception, we still can't explain the feeling of being, the raw experience of existence. Why should a collection of cells generate inner life at all? Why isn't the universe simply filled with lifeless matter, instead of things that can see, feel, and wonder? Some thinkers believe this question is unanswerable through physical science alone, because consciousness isn't a product of matter, it's the foundation upon which matter itself appears. In this view, the universe is not made of things, but of experiences. Matter and energy are patterns within a vast field of awareness. This idea, often called idealism or panpsychism, is both ancient and newly relevant. It appears in mystical traditions, but also in the writings of modern physicists and philosophers who see consciousness not as an accident, but as the very essence of reality. If that's true, then death may not be a destruction of consciousness, but a change in perspective, like a wave returning to the sea, or a dream shifting into another form. The body, like a vessel, may sink beneath the surface, but the awareness that once filled it continues within a deeper current. Even from a scientific point of view, it's fascinating how consciousness resists boundaries. Take memory, for example. We think of it as stored information in the brain, but research has shown that memory isn't confined to any one place. It's distributed across vast networks. If one part is damaged, another can sometimes adapt. It's as though the mind is less a structure and more a field of relationships, a pattern of energy sustained by connection. What happens to that pattern when the system stops? Does it vanish entirely, or does it imprint itself onto something larger, like a ripple fading outward into the ocean of reality? Some researchers studying quantum biology speculate that consciousness might involve quantum processes in the brain, phenomena that don't obey classical physics, where particles can exist in multiple states at once. If consciousness is tied to such quantum events, then perhaps it's not limited to the body's lifespan. Quantum information, after all, cannot be destroyed. It only changes form. That means the fundamental structure of what makes up awareness could, in some mysterious way, persist beyond death. Of course, these ideas live at the edge of science, where evidence meets wonder, but that edge has always been where humanity learns the most. We began by watching the stars, trying to understand what they were, and discovered galaxies. Maybe the same curiosity will one day reveal the true nature of the inner universe, the space of mind and being. Let's consider another strange clue: the reports of consciousness at the edge of death. Thousands of documented near-death experiences share remarkable similarities: floating above one's body, moving through a tunnel of light, encountering a profound sense of peace or oneness. These experiences transcend culture, age, and belief. They don't all match perfectly, but the essence is universal. The awareness feels larger, freer, more real than before. Those who return often describe a changed relationship with life, as if they've glimpsed a truth that can't be put fully into words. Skeptics say these are hallucinations caused by the brain under stress, a flood of chemicals easing the transition. Yet that explanation doesn't quite fit the data. Some people report accurate observations of their surroundings while clinically dead, details they couldn't have seen or heard from their position. Others describe meeting deceased relatives or beings of light. Science doesn't confirm these stories as proof of life after death, but neither can it fully dismiss them. They remain luminous question marks on the map of human understanding. What's undeniable is how these experiences transform people. Many lose their fear of dying, describing death as a homecoming, not an end. One person said it felt like remembering something I had always known but had forgotten. That description echoes something ancient, that consciousness might not begin at birth or end at death, but exist continuously, flowing through countless expressions of life. If we step back from metaphysics and look simply at nature, we see that nothing is wasted. Every death nourishes new life. The forest floor thrives on decay. Stars die and scatter the elements that form new worlds. The cycle of creation and dissolution seems to be the rhythm of the universe itself. Perhaps consciousness follows the same law. Perhaps what we call the death of awareness is just a necessary transformation, an exchange of form rather than an erasure of being. Imagine a flame lighting another candle. The first flame diminishes, but its light continues. In that sense, consciousness may be endlessly self-renewing, passing from one form to another, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden. Maybe every new life is not the beginning of consciousness, but the continuation of an infinite lineage of awareness, branching and rejoining like the roots of a vast tree. There's a curious comfort in that thought, because even if we can't trace where consciousness goes, we can sense that it belongs to something far greater than ourselves. You are not an isolated mind floating in space. You are part of a continuum that stretches beyond memory, beyond identity, beyond time. The awareness that animates you is the same force that shaped galaxies, that flows through oceans, that breathes through every living creature. It has no beginning and no end. It simply manifests, experiences, and transforms. Even language struggles to hold this truth. When we say my consciousness, we imply ownership. But what if it's the other way around? What if consciousness owns you? What if it uses your form, your story, your experiences as a way to know itself for a while? When you die, that knowing doesn't cease. It simply expands, returning to its original boundlessness. In that view, death is not a wall, but a doorway back into infinity. Philosophers have long debated whether consciousness is continuous or discrete. Do we experience awareness as a stream, or as individual moments that create the illusion of continuity? Either way, the experience itself is what matters. Right now, as you listen, there is awareness. It doesn't belong to any particular time or place. It's the same awareness that was present when you were a child, when you dreamed last night, when you first realized you could think about thinking. The body and mind have changed, but awareness remains strangely constant, like the sky behind passing clouds. The forms change, the seasons change, but the space in which they appear remains untouched. That may be the closest we can come to understanding what never dies. Awareness has no shape, no age, no boundaries. It is both personal and universal, intimate and infinite. To say it dies is to misunderstand what it is. Death may belong to the body, to the story of a particular self, but not to the pure presence that witnesses it all. You cannot kill awareness any more than you can destroy space itself. And perhaps this realization is what the ancients meant when they spoke of immortality. Not living forever as a person, but recognizing that what you truly are never began, and so it can never end. The body is born and dies, the personality rises and falls, but the witnessing consciousness behind it all remains, unbroken, silent, eternal. In moments of stillness, you can sense it. Between thoughts, there's a quiet. In that quiet, there's no past or future, no identity, just awareness, vast and peaceful. That same presence has been with you since the first breath, and will remain long after the last. To glimpse that truth, even for a moment, is to touch something that feels like eternity itself. There's an odd truth about consciousness that has puzzled scientists and mystics alike. It cannot be seen, touched, or measured directly, yet it's the most undeniable thing there is. You can doubt everything, your memories, your senses, even the world around you, but you cannot doubt that you are aware. Awareness is the one constant. Everything else could be illusion, but the experience of being conscious is real beyond question. So if that awareness feels so absolute, so fundamental, how could it ever die? When we talk about death, we often imagine a kind of vanishing. The body stops moving, the breath ends, and the light seems to go out. But perhaps that image comes from misunderstanding what the light actually is. Consciousness isn't something that flickers within the body. It might be what allows the body to appear in the first place. The mind and body could be expressions of consciousness, not its source. If that's true, then death is more like the ending of a performance. The stage lights dim, the actors leave, but the theatre itself remains. This idea might sound poetic, but it's increasingly echoed by thinkers in both science and philosophy. One of the great mysteries of modern physics is that the universe appears to require observation to exist in a definite way. At the quantum level, particles behave like clouds of potential, not solid objects. It's only when observed, when consciousness interacts, that they take on form and location. Some interpretations suggest that reality itself might be participatory, that the universe doesn't fully exist until it's experienced. If that's the case, then consciousness isn't just a product of the universe, it's a necessary ingredient of it. In a way, consciousness could be compared to the canvas on which the painting of existence appears. The brushstrokes, matter, time, thought, and memory, come and go, but the canvas remains unchanged beneath them. If the painting fades, the canvas doesn't die. It simply waits for another image to take shape. To most of us, though, consciousness feels deeply personal. It feels like me, my memories, my voice, my thoughts. Yet if you look closer, you start to notice that these things are constantly changing. The you that existed 10 years ago has been replaced cell by cell, thought by thought. Every molecule in your body has been renewed. Every belief, every habit, every preference has shifted in some way. And still, there's a feeling of continuity, the same presence that says, I am. That presence doesn't age, even as everything else does. It might not belong to the body or the story at all. Imagine that awareness as a kind of background hum that underlies every experience. It's there when you're joyful, and there when you're sad. It's there in deep sleep when dreams fade into silence. It's the thread connecting every moment of your life, and it might be the same thread that continues beyond it. Perhaps consciousness doesn't die because it was never truly individual. It only wore individuality as a temporary disguise. This is where science meets mysticism again. The more we study consciousness, the harder it becomes to separate the observer from what's observed. Every experiment designed to measure reality ends up revealing that the act of observation changes it. It's as though the universe is looking at itself through countless eyes, trying to know what it is. You, me, everyone. We might be the instruments through which the cosmos becomes self-aware. When we die, that awareness doesn't vanish. It simply continues in new forms, new perspectives, new arrangements of being. Think of how water becomes steam, or ice, or snow. All different states of the same essence. If consciousness is the fundamental substance of reality, then death is just a phase change. The body is ice, solid and visible. Life melts it into water, fluid, moving, dynamic, and death turns it to vapor, unseen, but still very much present. You can't destroy water by changing its form, and you can't destroy consciousness by changing its mode of existence. There's something comforting about that idea. It means that even as the body ages, even as thoughts fade, the essence behind them remains untouched. Consciousness doesn't belong to time, it only experiences time. It's the silent witness behind the ticking clock, watching beginnings and endings with the same calm attention. But what about the fear of nothingness? The thought that one day, awareness might simply stop. That fear feels so real because the mind can't imagine its own absence. Try to picture not existing. Instantly, awareness appears again, watching the attempt. It's impossible to imagine nothingness from within somethingness. Awareness can't perceive its own non-existence, it can only ever perceive existence. That may not be proof that consciousness continues, but it suggests something profound. Perhaps nothingness, as we conceive it, can't actually be experienced. This paradox hints at something deeper. If consciousness cannot experience its own absence, then maybe it never truly ends. Just as darkness isn't a force, but the absence of light, death might not be a force that erases consciousness. It might be simply the absence of form. The awareness itself remains, waiting for a new expression, a new pattern of existence. Some traditions describe this in terms of reincarnation, the idea that consciousness returns in new lives, new forms, endlessly learning, endlessly becoming. Others see it as a merging into the infinite, where the boundaries of self dissolve entirely. Both may describe the same reality from different angles. The self might be a temporary wave of awareness rising from an endless ocean. When the wave falls, the ocean remains, quiet, whole, alive. Consider this. Everything that has ever lived is still here in some form. The atoms in your body once belonged to ancient forests, long extinct animals, even distant stars. Life and death are part of one continuous circulation of energy and form. If the physical world is so beautifully cyclical, why would consciousness alone be linear? Maybe it too follows that same endless rhythm, appearing, dissolving, reappearing, forever moving through new experiences of being. There's also the question of memory. People often ask, if consciousness continues after death, why don't we remember where we came from? But memory is a function of the brain, bound to time and language. When the brain stops, memory may dissolve, but that doesn't mean consciousness does. It might continue without memory, pure and silent, free from the identity it once wore. Like a traveler waking from a dream, it leaves behind the details but carries the essence, the sense of having been. The great mystic Ramana Maharshi once said, "The sense of I am is the first to appear and the last to disappear." Perhaps even that final disappearance is not destruction, but awakening into a larger sense of being, where I and everything are no longer separate. There's an ancient Buddhist analogy that compares consciousness to the flame of a candle lighting another. The first flame doesn't move to the second, yet it's also not separate from it. It's a continuation, a transmission of energy. Life may work the same way. Each being is a temporary flame, and when it goes out, another arises, different in form, but carrying the same mysterious light. The more we look, the more the line between life and death blurs. Consciousness doesn't seem to have a sharp beginning or a clear end. It expands and contracts, deepens and rises, much like breathing. Birth is the inhale, death the exhale, but the air, the awareness itself, remains constant, moving through every living thing. When we observe the world through this lens, death stops feeling like an ending and begins to look like a return, like falling back into the vastness that has always been there, patiently holding every form that ever was or will be. In that vastness, perhaps nothing is ever lost. The songs we sing, the thoughts we think, the love we give, they all ripple outward, merging into the larger field of consciousness that connects us all. And maybe that's why, even in grief, there's sometimes a strange peace. Somewhere deep inside, we know that what we loved still exists, not as the same form, but as the same essence. Awareness cannot be buried because it was never contained. It continues in the quiet spaces, in the memory of light, in the stillness behind every heartbeat. Death changes everything except the one thing that was never born, consciousness itself. When scientists map the human brain, they see billions of neurons flickering like constellations in a private night sky. Each one fires electrical impulses that somehow become a thought, a memory, a feeling. From this perspective, consciousness appears to emerge from complexity, the intricate dance of matter giving rise to mind. Yet for all our progress, no one can explain how matter becomes aware of itself. This mystery is known as the hard problem of consciousness. We can trace every neural pathway, identify every signal, and still be left wondering who or what is doing the experiencing. Some researchers suggest that maybe we've been asking the question backward. Instead of trying to explain how the brain produces consciousness, what if we consider that consciousness produces the brain? Not as a fantasy, but as a framework that allows awareness to interact with the physical world. It's like a virtual reality headset, complex, immersive, and detailed, but not the origin of the experience itself. The body might be a vessel, not a generator, a translator through which consciousness expresses itself into physical form. When the vessel is damaged, the signal weakens. Consciousness appears clouded or fragmented, like a radio station slipping out of range. But the signal itself, the broadcast, still exists, untouched. It's just no longer being received clearly. Could death, then, be the moment when the receiver turns off completely and the broadcast continues elsewhere, free from limitation? In near-death experiences, people often describe something astonishingly similar: the sensation of leaving the body, of observing themselves from above, and of entering a realm that feels more real than life itself. They report a luminous presence, overwhelming peace, and a sense of being one with everything. Skeptics argue that these are the brain's final hallucinations, chemical storms as neurons shut down. Yet even that explanation raises a question. Why do these experiences feel more vivid than waking life? Why do they often lead to lasting transformations, replacing fear with calm and purpose. Perhaps the truth isn't either or. Maybe the brain's final surge of activity opens a doorway. Consciousness, released from its usual boundaries, glimpses its own vastness, something it could never fully access while tethered to the physical. The descriptions of those moments, timelessness, unity, light, are strikingly similar to what mystics across cultures have spoken of for centuries. In Tibetan traditions, for instance, the moment of death is described as the unveiling of the clear light of awareness. It's said that in that instant, consciousness returns to its pure, unconditioned state. The challenge is to recognize it, not to recoil in fear. If recognized, liberation occurs. The wave remembers it was always the ocean. Modern neuroscience, surprisingly, has begun to observe flashes of coherence in the dying brain, sudden, organized surges of energy moments before death. Could this be the physical echo of consciousness letting go, returning to its source? If so, then perhaps death isn't the end of awareness, but its expansion. Life is the narrowing of consciousness into a single perspective, you. Death could be the dissolving of that narrowness, a widening back into the whole. The self, the I, is like a small window that frames the infinite. When that window closes, the view doesn't vanish, only the frame does. Let's consider another perspective, one from physics. Energy, as we know, cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form. The electrical impulses in your brain, the biofield surrounding your body, the heat and movement of every cell, none of it disappears. It transforms. So if energy persists, why not the information carried within it? Quantum theory tells us that information, once encoded into the universe, can never be completely lost. Consciousness may be part of that universal information, an organized pattern that transcends individual form. In that case, death is a reconfiguration, not an ending. It's possible that consciousness is woven into the structure of reality itself, as fundamental as space or time. This idea, called panpsychism, suggests that everything in the universe possesses a spark of awareness, however faint. From electrons to galaxies, all things participate in consciousness to some degree. Human awareness would then be a complex, organized expression of a universal property, like a cresting wave in a vast sea of mind. When a person dies, their individual wave subsides, but the sea remains, and every ripple that wave created continues to move outward forever. The idea might sound abstract, but in some ways it feels deeply intuitive. We sense connection to nature, to others, to something beyond ourselves. When you look at a sunset or hear a piece of music that moves you to tears, there's a fleeting recognition that what you're seeing and what you are aren't separate. That moment of wonder may be consciousness remembering itself through you. Even in modern cosmology, hints of awareness appear in unexpected places. The laws of the universe seem finely tuned for life, a fraction of a change in the forces that govern reality, and existence as we know it would be impossible. Some call this coincidence, others suspect a deeper order. Maybe the universe is conscious of itself through evolution, complexity, and ultimately through beings like us. We are the eyes with which the cosmos looks back at itself. If this is true, then death cannot mean disappearance. It's more like changing the angle of view. Consciousness might simply move beyond the narrow focus of the human experience, returning to the wider field from which it came. Like taking off a mask after a long performance, it was always you behind it, playing a role in the grand story of being. Some people describe glimpses of that truth during moments of deep meditation or near death. They say that everything feels unified, as if every boundary between self and other, life and death, melts away. Scientists studying these experiences find reduced activity in the brain's default mode network, the region tied to the sense of individual identity. When that part quiets down, the illusion of separation fades, and consciousness expands. If that expansion feels infinite while the brain is still alive, imagine what happens when the brain no longer limits it at all. This leads to an unsettling but fascinating thought. Maybe consciousness isn't inside us at all. Maybe we are inside consciousness. The mind is not a container, but a doorway. When the door opens, what we call death might be nothing more than stepping into a larger room. There are moments in nature that reflect this perfectly. Think of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. To the caterpillar, the cocoon must feel like death. Everything it knows dissolves. Its form, its identity, even its perception of the world disappears. But from a higher perspective, that death is transformation. The same life continues, simply in another form. Maybe we are the same, cocooned in physical existence, destined to awaken into something we can't yet imagine. Or imagine the ocean once more. A single wave crashes on the shore and seems to vanish, but the water remains. It returns to the sea, where it will one day rise again as another wave, another moment, another life. Consciousness, in that sense, is the ocean, and every individual life a temporary movement of it. What dies is the form, not the essence. The scientist and philosopher Erwin Schrödinger once wrote, "The total number of minds in the universe is one." In fact, consciousness is a singularity phasing within itself. He wasn't speaking in metaphor. He meant that the separations we perceive between consciousnesses are illusions created by perspective, like the reflections of one sun on many waves. When one reflection fades, the sun doesn't dim. It continues, shining through countless others. This view doesn't deny the pain of loss. Grief is real and human. It comes from love, and love itself might be another expression of the same universal consciousness trying to remember its unity. When we mourn someone, perhaps what hurts most is not that they're gone, but that their particular form of awareness is no longer here to mirror our own. Yet even that pain is sacred. It's the universe reminding itself that nothing truly disappears, only changes shape. Maybe that's why, in quiet moments, we sometimes feel their presence again, not in the way they once were, but as something softer, wordless, a familiar energy in the stillness. Perhaps it's not our imagination at all, but resonance, the field of consciousness remembering its connections. And so, if consciousness is the ground of being, then death is not the end of life. It's life returning to its ground. Not darkness, but depth. Not silence, but the pause before a new song. We come and go like waves on an eternal sea, but the awareness that moves us never ceases. Throughout history, humans have tried to understand what happens to consciousness when the body ceases to live. Ancient civilizations, long before the rise of modern science, treated this question not as speculation, but as truth woven into the fabric of their culture. The Egyptians believed that consciousness, or the Ka, continued its journey beyond death, guided through vast realms of the afterlife. The Greeks spoke of the soul crossing the river Styx. The Hindus described the Atman, the eternal self, reincarnating again and again in search of realization. Even the earliest shamans and tribes believed that consciousness moved beyond the veil of death. Their rituals, songs, and sacred dances were not meant to mourn an ending, but to help the soul transition, to remind it that death was not a wall, but a doorway. For them, consciousness was like fire. It could change what it touched, move from one place to another, but never be extinguished. Today, we use the language of neuroscience and physics instead of myth, but the question remains strangely similar. What is it that leaves when a person dies? A scientist might say that it's the end of brain activity, the shutdown of neural patterns that once created thought and emotion. But that explanation doesn't capture the profound sense of presence that once animated the body. There's an unmistakable difference between a living person and a lifeless one, something intangible yet unmistakable. It's as though the music has stopped, but the instrument remains. That difference, that missing quality, is what we've always called the soul, or consciousness, or awareness. Science can describe every molecule in a body, but it still cannot locate that essence. It's not measurable, because it's not a thing. It's the experiencer of all things. You can't put consciousness under a microscope because the act of seeing already depends on it. The observer cannot be observed in the same way. This paradox has led some thinkers to propose that consciousness is not an emergent property of the brain, but a fundamental element of reality, one that matter organizes around, like planets around a star. If that's the case, then the death of a body doesn't mean the death of consciousness any more than a shattered mirror destroys the reflection of light. The light remains. It simply appears elsewhere. In modern research, an increasing number of cases challenge our assumptions about death. For instance, in controlled studies of cardiac arrest patients, doctors have recorded moments of brain inactivity, complete silence in the neural data, during which individuals later reported vivid, coherent experiences. They described events in the room, conversations among doctors, even details they couldn't have known. These accounts defy our traditional models. If consciousness requires brain activity, how could awareness persist when the brain had already stopped? Some argue that this might suggest the mind can operate independently of the physical structure. Others propose that consciousness exists on a deeper field, perhaps quantum, perhaps something we've yet to name, that temporarily interfaces with the brain. When the body dies, that interface dissolves, but the field remains. It's like disconnecting a device from a vast network. The device is gone, but the network still hums with life. Quantum physicists like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have even explored the possibility that consciousness arises from quantum processes within microtubules, tiny structures inside neurons. If consciousness is rooted in the quantum realm, it might not be confined by space and time as we know them. Quantum states can exist beyond classical boundaries. They can become entangled, persist, and reappear across distances. In that sense, death might not be the severing of consciousness, but a shift in its state, a transition from local awareness to something non-local, diffused throughout the cosmos. It's an extraordinary idea, but not entirely foreign. Indigenous philosophies, Eastern teachings, and even certain branches of Western mysticism have said the same in different words for millennia, that consciousness is everywhere, and we are temporary vessels for its expression. The individual mind is a ripple, the infinite mind is the ocean. If this is true, then our fear of death may come from identifying too much with the ripple. We see ourselves as the small, fleeting movement instead of the vast water that gives rise to it. The more deeply one contemplates this, the more that fear begins to dissolve. Because if awareness is the foundation of all things, then nothing is ever truly lost. Every experience, every thought, every spark of love exists within that unbroken field, always accessible, always part of the whole. There's an ancient Indian concept called Akasha, a kind of cosmic record that holds every vibration, every event, every thought that has ever occurred. Modern theorists sometimes compare it to the idea of the zero-point field or the information layer of the universe. If consciousness interacts with that layer, then even after death, our essence, our patterns of thought and experience, might remain encoded within it. We would not vanish, but merge with the larger memory of existence. This could explain why so many people throughout history have claimed to sense or communicate with loved ones long after death. It's easy to dismiss such experiences as imagination or emotion, but what if memory, emotion, and awareness are imprinted in the very structure of reality itself? What if grief is not just mourning the past, but feeling the resonance of consciousness across dimensions we barely understand? Think of it this way: a song once sung continues to vibrate in the air even after the voice is silent. The sound waves ripple outward, subtle and fading, but never truly gone. In the same way, every act of awareness sends ripples through the field of being. When a person dies, their particular melody changes form, but the vibrations continue to echo through time and space, perhaps finding new harmonies with other waves of consciousness. Maybe this is why certain places, certain moments, carry a strange feeling of presence, a sense that something unseen lingers. Maybe it's not superstition at all, but sensitivity to those faint echoes, the resonance of consciousness itself still moving through the invisible structure of the world. Even dreams might hint at this continuity. When we sleep, the mind lets go of the physical world, yet consciousness continues in another form, wandering, exploring, creating. If awareness can exist independently of the body in dreams, why not after death? Each night, we dissolve into unconsciousness and return without fear. Perhaps death is a longer version of that same mystery, an extended dream where consciousness travels beyond the limits of biology. It's striking how similar these ideas are across time and culture. The Aztecs believed that consciousness would move through several realms after death, learning and evolving. The Tibetans described Bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth, where awareness remains vivid but unanchored. Even in Christianity, the notion of an eternal soul echoes the same core idea. Consciousness endures. Perhaps the reason these beliefs persist isn't because they're comforting, but because deep down we sense their truth. The continuity of awareness feels more natural than its extinction. We've all glimpsed it, in the timelessness of love, the déjà vu of a place we've never been, the wordless connection between minds. These moments whisper that consciousness isn't confined to a single lifetime. And yet there's humility in admitting we cannot prove it. Science reaches the edges of what can be measured. Philosophy reaches the limits of what can be reasoned. And still, consciousness remains beyond capture. It is both the observer and the observed, the question and the questioner. It hides behind our eyes, even as we search for it. When we try to define what consciousness is, we quickly discover how slippery the idea becomes. Science can measure the electrical patterns of the brain, but it can't measure the taste of an experience, the warmth of sunlight, the ache of nostalgia, the quiet peace that follows understanding. These inner experiences, called qualia, are impossible to explain using physical terms alone. You can study the wavelength of red light, but that won't tell you what red feels like. Somehow, matter gives rise to experience, or experience gives rise to matter. We don't yet know which way the arrow points. Some physicists and philosophers have begun to suspect that the answer lies in a shift of perspective. What if consciousness isn't something that happens within the universe, but the field within which the universe happens? In that case, what we think of as physical reality would be the expression of consciousness organizing itself into matter, form, and energy. From this viewpoint, consciousness never truly dies, because it was never truly born. It simply flows into different expressions of itself: galaxies, stars, planets, life, and finally, you. Imagine that consciousness is like light shining through stained glass. The patterns and colors are unique for each piece, but the light itself remains unchanged. When the glass breaks, the light doesn't disappear. It just shines differently, finding new paths, illuminating new forms. Death might be the breaking of one pattern, allowing the light to pass freely again. This way of seeing the universe transforms everything. Suddenly, the line between living and non-living begins to blur. The atoms in your body were once part of ancient stars. Those stars were born from clouds of gas that emerged from the aftermath of earlier cosmic events. The matter that makes you has already died countless times and been reborn into new shapes. If consciousness is embedded within all matter, then this cycle of transformation, birth, death, rebirth, is not just physical, but also experiential. The universe has been conscious of itself in countless ways, and each of us is a temporary window through which it continues to awaken. This is a humbling thought, but also a liberating one. It means that our individual consciousnesses, while seemingly small and fleeting, are expressions of something vast and timeless. When we die, it's not that consciousness ends, it's that the particular perspective we call me returns to the whole. It's the ocean reclaiming the wave. But even within life, consciousness constantly shifts and transforms. You are not the same awareness you were as a child. The sense of self you have now has changed through every experience, every joy, every heartbreak. Yet something within you, the witness, remains untouched. It has observed your entire story unfold, quietly aware through every transformation. That silent witness may be the same consciousness that existed long before you were born, and the same that will continue after. In deep states of meditation, people sometimes report glimpses of this pure awareness, a state beyond identity, beyond memory, beyond time. It feels infinite, serene, and unmistakably real. Neuroscientists studying advanced meditators have found that during these experiences, the brain's activity in regions associated with the sense of self temporarily quiets. The result is a feeling of boundless unity, as though one's awareness expands beyond the body. These experiences are often described as glimpsing the nature of consciousness itself, something that cannot die because it was never confined to begin with. Even nature reflects this principle. Consider the forest. To the eye, it's made up of countless individual trees, each separate and alive in its own right. But beneath the soil, a hidden network connects them all, a vast web of roots and fungi through which nutrients, chemicals, and even signals are exchanged. When one tree falls, its life energy nourishes others. The forest continues. It's a living metaphor for consciousness, individual expressions connected by an unseen intelligence that holds everything together. Death, in this sense, is not subtraction, it's contribution. It's the return of form into the flow of life. There's a kind of poetic symmetry to it all. The universe creates conscious beings, who then turn around and ask, "What am I?" That very question might be the universe's way of exploring itself. When you wonder about your own awareness, consciousness is reflecting upon itself. That reflection might continue in infinite ways, across infinite forms, long after this particular one dissolves. Some researchers have proposed that consciousness could be the informational fabric of the cosmos, the underlying code that reality runs on. Just as a computer program continues to exist even if one device shuts down, consciousness could persist beyond the death of the biological hardware. The program keeps running in the universal system, adapting and evolving through new forms. Others go further, suggesting that consciousness is timeless, that what we experience as a flow of moments is just awareness moving across a static field of reality. From this perspective, every moment that has ever been or will be still exists, eternally present. Your birth, your first laugh, your last breath, all are already written into the fabric of existence. Consciousness doesn't travel through time. It experiences slices of an eternal whole. Death, then, isn't a journey forward or backward. It's a shift in focus, a change in what part of the field awareness is tuned to. This idea echoes ancient teachings from both East and West. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that the self is neither born nor does it die. It is unborn, eternal, ever-existing. In modern physics, Einstein expressed a similar idea when he said that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Both statements, separated by millennia, describe the same realization. Consciousness and existence are not bound by the linear passage of time. If this is true, then our lives are like threads woven into a vast tapestry that already exists in its entirety. We appear to move along our individual strands, but the whole pattern, the timeless totality of being, is already complete. Death would simply be the moment when our awareness steps back to see the full design, beyond the illusion of separation. And perhaps that's why mystical traditions often describe enlightenment and death in nearly identical terms. Both involve the dissolution of the personal self, the ending of attachment to form. Both are described as awakenings into a greater reality, one that has always been there, waiting beneath the noise of thought. The difference is that one happens while the body still lives, and the other happens when it no longer does. In either case, what remains is the same: pure consciousness, without boundaries, without end. It's possible, too, that death reveals not emptiness, but fullness. A fullness so complete that our limited minds can't perceive it while alive. We often imagine non-existence as a void, a nothingness. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's everything, all at once, beyond our capacity to hold. Like trying to pour the ocean into a single cup. And when we let go, when consciousness no longer identifies with the limits of the cup, it merges back into that ocean of infinite potential. That might be what mystics mean by union with the divine, or what scientists might one day describe as reintegration with the universal field. 2 languages, 1 mystery. If consciousness truly never dies, then the most extraordinary thing is happening right now. You, as awareness, are temporarily exploring the experience of being human. You have forgotten your vastness in order to fully experience individuality. Birth is the narrowing of infinite awareness into a single perspective. Death is the expansion back into infinity. Life, then, is not a struggle against death. It's the bridge between the two. Maybe that's what existence itself is. Consciousness endlessly creating and dissolving forms so that it can rediscover itself, over and over again, in endless diversity. Every star, every cell, every mind is a spark of that eternal process. To die is simply to change the way you shine. It's easy to think of consciousness as something contained inside our heads, an echo of neural activity, trapped behind bone and skin. But if we look closer, the boundaries between inner and outer begin to blur. Every sensation you've ever had, sound, color, touch, taste, exists not out there, but within the field of awareness. The entire universe, as far as you can ever know it, exists within consciousness. When you close your eyes, the stars, the trees, the world itself, all of it disappears until awareness returns to illuminate them again. This simple truth leads to a profound question. What if consciousness isn't inside you at all? What if you are inside it? What if reality itself unfolds within a vast field of awareness that gives rise to both mind and matter alike? Some of the world's most enduring philosophies have hinted at this. The Upanishads of ancient India describe consciousness as the foundation of all that exists, calling it Brahman, the infinite, unchanging reality beneath the shifting forms of the world. The individual self, or Atman, is said to be identical with that infinite awareness. To realize this unity is to transcend death, because the true self was never born and can never cease. Modern science, though using different language, has started to circle the same mystery. In physics, the observer plays a curious role. At the quantum level, particles behave like waves of probability until they're measured or observed. Only then do they take on a definite state. In a way, consciousness seems to help shape reality itself. Without awareness to witness it, the universe might remain a sea of infinite potential, an uncollapsed dream. This doesn't mean the mind creates the universe, but that consciousness and the physical world are entangled in a way we don't yet understand. They might be 2 aspects of the same underlying reality, like 2 sides of a coin. Matter may be what consciousness looks like when viewed from the outside. Consciousness may be what matter feels like from within. If this is true, then consciousness doesn't depend on the body. It simply uses it as a temporary lens. When that lens breaks, the vision changes, but the light continues to shine. It's the same with music. The song needs an instrument to be heard, but the music itself exists beyond the instrument. A broken violin doesn't end the melody. It only changes how it's played. Perhaps consciousness, too, continues to play its infinite melody through countless forms and lifetimes, always exploring new harmonies of experience. We might even be able to see traces of this in how nature works. Consider how ecosystems recycle life endlessly, how decay feeds growth, and endings become beginnings. The forest doesn't mourn when a leaf falls. It transforms that loss into nourishment for the whole. The death of one form fuels the life of another, and through it all, the same pulse of energy continues. If consciousness is part of that cycle, then death is not destruction, it's renewal. And perhaps the fear of death comes from identifying too deeply with the temporary form. We think, I am this body, this story, these memories. But those are like waves on the surface of the ocean, beautiful, fleeting, and always changing. Beneath them, the water remains unchanged. When the wave falls back into the sea, nothing is truly lost. The ocean doesn't mourn the wave. It was always part of itself. Mystics across cultures have described moments of realizing this truth as awakenings. They speak of seeing the unity of all things, the sense that consciousness is one vast being, experiencing itself through countless eyes. When this is glimpsed, the fear of death dissolves, replaced by a quiet knowing. You are not the form, but the awareness that holds all forms. Even in modern psychology, echoes of this truth appear. Carl Jung, for example, suggested that each individual mind is connected to a larger collective unconscious, a shared field of archetypes, dreams, and instincts that transcends time and individuality. This idea, though psychological in origin, mirrors the mystical concept of a single consciousness manifesting through many minds. It's as if every person is a different facet of one great mirror, reflecting the same light in unique ways. In that sense, the death of one facet doesn't diminish the mirror. It simply changes how the light moves across it. Consciousness, being whole and indivisible, continues reflecting through all remaining facets. When viewed this way, life and death stop being opposites. They become parts of a single process, like inhaling and exhaling. Consciousness breathes itself into form, experiences existence, then exhales back into formlessness. The entire universe may be breathing in this way, creating and dissolving worlds in an eternal rhythm. Galaxies appear and fade, stars are born and die. But the field of awareness that holds it all remains timeless. It's possible that every death is followed by re-entry into that timeless state, a vast, still silence that feels neither alive nor dead, but beyond both. Some who have had near-death experiences describe this state vividly, an overwhelming sense of unity, of being everything and nothing at once. Time disappears, individuality melts away, and what's left is pure awareness. Calm, radiant, infinite. When they return, many say that they no longer fear death, because they've already touched what lies beyond it. What if death isn't an ending, but a remembering? A return to what we've always been? Life could then be seen as consciousness deliberately forgetting its own infinity, so it can rediscover it through experience. Each birth is a narrowing of the infinite into the personal, and each death is the widening back into the whole. There's an elegance to this pattern, a kind of cosmic symmetry. The universe, it seems, is not wasting anything. Every thought, every emotion, every moment of awareness contributes to its ongoing story. And maybe that's the real purpose of existence. Not survival, but exploration. Consciousness, through living beings, is exploring itself, learning, feeling, understanding. Every life adds a new note to the symphony of awareness. If so, then death is not the silence after the song, but the pause between movements. The melody continues, changed, evolved, deepened. Consciousness doesn't vanish, it shifts, finding new instruments to play through, new worlds to explore. In that light, even grief takes on new meaning. To grieve is to love something so much that its absence expands your awareness. The pain of loss opens a space, and in that space, something larger can be felt. It's as though consciousness itself uses grief to remind us of its own vastness, its eternal continuity beneath the passing of forms. There's an ancient idea that the universe is self-aware, that it created life not as an accident, but as a way to look back at itself. Consciousness, in this view, is not a byproduct of matter, but the reason matter exists at all. Every living thing becomes a window through which the cosmos observes itself, learns about itself, and evolves its own understanding. If this is true, then consciousness doesn't die with the individual. It changes vantage points. It shifts from one perspective to another, from one form to another. The death of a person would be no more than the closing of one window, while countless others remain open, all gazing out from the same infinite source. Perhaps this is why so many people report a strange familiarity in moments of deep peace or meditation, as if they are returning to something they've always known. In those moments, the mind grows quiet, the boundaries of self soften, and a subtle recognition emerges. This awareness feels eternal, not in the sense of endless time, but in the sense that time doesn't even apply. It's like remembering a home you never left. If consciousness truly transcends death, then it may be woven into the very fabric of existence itself. Every atom, every vibration, every spark of energy could carry a trace of awareness. Some scientists and philosophers call this idea panpsychism, the belief that consciousness is not something the universe develops, but something it is. From the smallest particle to the largest galaxy, awareness might be a fundamental quality of all things, an invisible thread connecting everything that exists. Under this view, the evolution of life isn't the beginning of consciousness, but its awakening in form. The universe has always been aware. Life is simply the part of it that knows it's aware. Our minds, our experiences, even our doubts could be seen as expressions of that cosmic self-reflection. And if that's the case, then consciousness doesn't belong to us. It flows through us. It's not owned or contained. It's more like sunlight, shining through countless leaves, each one shaping it in a unique pattern, but none creating the light itself. When a leaf falls, the light doesn't die. It keeps shining, illuminating new shapes, finding new paths. Even the great cycles of creation and destruction in the cosmos seem to mirror this truth. Stars are born, live brilliant lives, and collapse. Yet their deaths scatter the elements that form new stars, new planets, new life. Every ending becomes the seed of another beginning. Consciousness might follow the same rhythm, never lost, only transformed, always finding new forms through which to experience itself. We sometimes imagine death as darkness, as a vanishing point, but perhaps it's more like stepping from one dream into another. Each dream feels complete while we're in it. Each seems to define reality. Yet when we awaken, we realize that we were never confined to that one dream. We were always the dreamer, the one who moves through all dreams, all lives, all moments. If so, then the end of the body might not be the end of the dreamer. It could simply be the end of one particular story. Consciousness, being infinite, may continue telling countless others, each unique and necessary. Across cultures, we find echoes of this idea. In ancient Egypt, the soul was said to journey through the underworld, facing tests and transformations before being reborn. In Tibetan Buddhism, consciousness passes through intermediate realms, guided by light and memory, seeking a new vessel to continue its experience. Even in Western philosophy, thinkers like Plato believed that the soul pre-existed birth and survives death, cycling through lifetimes as it learns and evolves. These are not proofs, but patterns, recurring intuitions that perhaps point to something larger. Throughout history, humans have felt that consciousness is too vast, too mysterious to be extinguished by death. It may change shape, dissolve, reform, or merge, but it never simply disappears. Even modern accounts of near-death experiences seem to reflect this sense of continuity. People who are clinically dead for minutes or longer often report vivid awareness, seeing their surroundings from outside their body, feeling enveloped by a brilliant light, or experiencing an overwhelming sense of peace and unity. Many describe it as more real than waking life, as though death pulled back a veil rather than extinguishing awareness. Skeptics argue these are neurological reactions, hallucinations created by a dying brain. Yet, in some cases, people accurately describe events that occurred while they were medically unconscious, their brains showing no measurable activity. The evidence is inconclusive, but the implications are intriguing. If even a few of these experiences are genuine, they hint that consciousness may not depend entirely on the brain to exist. If consciousness can exist independently, even briefly, then death might not be a wall, but a threshold. The dissolution of form could simply reveal a deeper layer of awareness that was always there, like removing clouds to reveal the sky. The body passes, but the sky remains untouched. And if that's true, then consciousness could be the fundamental constant in the universe, the one thing that never ends. Stars burn out, galaxies collide, matter decays, but awareness continues, observing every rise and fall. It's the stage upon which existence unfolds and the witness to its endless transformations. That idea brings a strange comfort, because if consciousness truly never dies, then nothing we love is ever truly lost. Every connection, every moment of joy or sorrow, every act of kindness ripples through that infinite field. It may change form, but it's never gone. It becomes part of the fabric of the eternal awareness that holds everything. It also means that what we call individuality might be an illusion of perspective. Like waves in an ocean, we appear separate, but beneath the surface, we are part of one continuous whole. When one wave falls, the ocean doesn't lose anything. It simply flows on, reshaping itself endlessly. Perhaps the deepest realization isn't that consciousness survives death, but that it never belonged to the individual in the first place. The you that dies is only the temporary pattern consciousness took for a while, a story within the infinite. When the story ends, the storyteller remains. And so, death might not be the vanishing of self, but the return of self into everything, the release of the drop back into the sea, the end of separation, and the rediscovery of unity. If we could truly feel this, if we could live with this awareness, the fear of death might dissolve completely. Not because we deny it, but because we see through it. Death stops being a tragedy and becomes part of the rhythm of existence, a necessary movement in the dance of being. Every breath you take mirrors that rhythm. Inhale, exhale, creation, and dissolution. Life and death are happening in you with every moment. Cells die and are reborn. Thoughts appear and fade. Sensations rise and vanish. Consciousness remains through it all, silently observing, endlessly aware. Maybe this is the true immortality, not the continuation of a personal identity, but the eternal presence behind all identities, the awareness that has never begun and will never end. And if we can touch that awareness, even for a moment, we might realize that we've already overcome death. Not through belief or hope, but through direct recognition. What we are can never die because it was never born. When we speak of death, it's easy to think in absolutes, alive or gone, existing or erased. But consciousness seems to whisper something softer, something in between. It tells us that endings may only be transitions, that silence can hold presence, and that what we call the end might simply be another beginning, unseen but deeply felt. Think about how light moves. It doesn't vanish when you turn away. It travels on, invisible until it meets something capable of reflecting it. Maybe consciousness behaves the same way. When it leaves the body, it doesn't end. It just continues beyond the horizon of what our senses can perceive, waiting to be reflected again in some new form, some new moment of awareness. This thought alone can change the way we live. If consciousness doesn't die, then each moment of awareness, every glance, every breath, every act of love becomes part of something timeless. It means that how we live matters not just for this lifetime, but for the endless stream of awareness flowing through it. Every thought contributes to the whole. Every kindness echoes beyond the self that offered it. Imagine that the universe is a vast sea of awareness, and every life is a ripple upon its surface. Your ripple may seem small, but it touches countless others, spreading outward, merging, shaping the texture of reality itself. And when that ripple fades, it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the stillness that gives rise to new ripples. In that stillness, everything that ever was still exists, not as memory, but as presence. Perhaps this is what we sense when we feel that someone we've lost is still near. Maybe it's not just imagination or longing. Maybe it's the way consciousness continues to weave itself through our awareness. The ones we love may not be gone at all. They might simply be beyond the veil of perception, existing in a layer of reality that our waking minds can't yet reach. And yet, somewhere deep within, we do reach them. In dreams, in intuition, in sudden waves of peace that come without reason. In the quiet moments when we feel connected to something vast, warm, and eternal. Those moments remind us that consciousness is not a prisoner of flesh. It's the space in which everything arises. When you look at the stars, you are not only seeing light from the past, you are participating in a conversation across time. Your awareness of them completes the exchange. The light has traveled billions of years to meet your eyes, and in that instant of recognition, consciousness meets itself. That same awareness that burns in the heart of stars burns within you, and perhaps it always has. Even when we sleep, this awareness never fully fades. Our dreams are proof that consciousness continues to explore, to create, even in the absence of the waking world. It retreats inward, reshaping itself into stories and symbols, reflecting the infinite creativity of the mind that never truly rests. In this sense, sleep itself is a gentle rehearsal for death, a temporary surrender followed by awakening. And every morning, when you open your eyes, consciousness re-enters its chosen story once more. So tonight, as you lie here listening, you might let this understanding settle gently into your thoughts. Maybe you have never truly been separate from anything. Maybe you are part of something eternal, something that has watched suns form and dissolve, something that has taken the shape of every life that ever was. You have been everything, and you will be everything again. There is nothing to lose, because nothing real can ever be lost. The essence that perceives this moment will outlast every form it inhabits. It is older than stars, yet it feels as new as the next breath. It is you, the true you, beyond name, beyond story, beyond time. Let yourself rest in that awareness now. Feel it like a gentle current beneath the surface of your thoughts. There's no need to reach for it. It's already here, silently watching, patiently waiting. It has carried you through every lifetime, through every dream and awakening. It will carry you beyond this one too, into whatever comes next. As you drift into rest, imagine that you are not falling asleep, but returning home, to that endless field of consciousness that has always been your truest self. Here, there is no fear of ending, because nothing ends. There is no loneliness, because nothing is separate. There is only the vast stillness of being, the quiet knowing that consciousness in all its mystery will never truly die. So breathe softly. Let go of every thought of before and after. Let the universe hold you in its timeless awareness, the same awareness that beats within your heart. Feel it expand, merging with the stars, the wind, the earth beneath you. It's all one vast living mind, and you are its dream. And as you drift deeper into that dream, know that you are safe, eternal, and endlessly alive. Thank you for joining me tonight, here in Sleep Space. Wherever consciousness may wander, it will always find its way back to this quiet, infinite stillness we share. Good night.